I want to start with just a little bit of a disclaimer. If we were designing this room for this event, we would not be on a stage. It would be a great big round circle. So imagine that that's what it is. It is going to be a different kind of South by conversation. And the word town hall in the title is not an accident. I was going to say something about no speechifying at the microphone, and then I was like, well, screw that. Of course there's going to be speechifying. We want speechifying. Think of it like a school board meeting or a local community board meeting. The state of where we are in social media is complicated, and I'm hopeful that you will bring your best, fieriest, fiercest self to this conversation. With that, we have 4 amazing people on the stage. They are not here to be experts. They're not going to vote on your idea. We're not like an Olympics jury. But we asked them to also share their personal stories about things that went well and didn't go well. So we're going to get to that in just a second, but I wanted to just start by setting a little bit of a stage. So 2008 was an important year, and when we talk about 15 years, it's worth remembering how we got here. The headline from Wired magazine was, 2008 is the year the audience keynoted. And probably most of you were not here, don't remember it, but it was a legendary year. And it was a legendary year because Mark Zuckerberg and Sarah Lacy had an onstage keynote conversation in which the audience essentially took over Twitter and just took the whole thing apart. What I learned last night when you read the Wired magazine article is that it was planned. And it really was the exhibition of the democratization of media. And if you watch the interview objectively, it was fine. Like I know Sarah a long time. Mark was Mark. There's nothing in it sitting here today that would surprise you, but it was a bit of a meltdown. So after that, Wired magazine interviewed Hugh, and this is what he said. He said, certainly to come to that kind of a climax with the Zuckerberg thing, which wasn't what we had wished it would have turned out a little differently. However, taken as an experiment, this is the new digital stuff and how it works, and it's pretty fascinating. I love that quote because it is exactly what it was. It was like, we kind of unleashed this thing. Nobody strategized it. Nobody said, we're gonna let this social media thing out into the wild, and this is the place where it happened. So this is what we're gonna do, and with that, I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves, and then I'm gonna ask them each a question. Natasha.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Natasha Tiku. I'm the tech culture reporter for The Washington Post, and I've been covering tech for, let's say, 15 years.
Hi, my name is Brittany Kaiser, and I'm a data rights activist. Some might know me as the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower. And over the past 5 years, I've spent most of my time writing digital asset legislation, doing global lobbying on data protection and privacy, and I founded the Own Your Data Foundation, where we teach digital literacy.
And I'm Josh Williams. Like Hugh said, I've now launched Gowalla here twice at South by Southwest, and I'm a 5th-generation Texan who's stuck in California. It's just a pleasure to be back.
Okay. Welcome, panel. So to start it off, I thought it would be fun to ask each person to tell a story, brief story, about something that happened to them that relates to social media that was wonderful and positive. And I will begin and tell a story. It was midway through, we didn't know that COVID had a beginning, middle, and end. It was year 2, and at that time in New York, we thought it might be forever. And we decided, my wife and I, that what we needed to do was adopt a puppy. Turns out this was not a unique thing. There was a run on puppies during COVID. And I went on Instagram, which I was not a regular user of, and stumbled into this thing, a user called Social Teas, and they just had this extraordinary collection of puppies. And one of them, who I saw on social media, just literally swept us off our feet. I don't think we've been out of the apartment in 6 months. And we reached out, we filled out all the paperwork, we adopted this puppy, sight unseen, and we got in an Uber all masked up and gloves and all kinds of layers of stuff. and we went and rescued this amazing puppy. So this is Duke. And Duke is our COVID puppy, and he's our social media puppy. And the people at Social Tees are fantastic. And they told us that he was a Chihuahua Beagle mix, which turned out to be completely untrue. Little secret, they have no idea what the mix is. But he actually won an award. He actually went to puppy training in Central Park outdoors. And that, I thought of a lot of good things social media has done for me, but Duke is far and away my favorite. So with that, Natasha, tell a good social media story.
Well, I don't have one particular story, but as a journalist, I basically live on social media and owe my career to it and a lot of the entertainment to it. It's actually exactly what you were describing with the Twitter takedown of Mark Zuckerberg's interview. I live for that stuff. Just when you can plug yourself into the fire hose and you feel like you are on the same wavelength as all these people, really doesn't matter where they are, and you're reacting to an event at the same time. I mean, there's just nothing else like that. It just feels like, I guess, the internet sense of community, but faster. Yeah, I love it. Put me in that state all the time.
So really, I think we know the terrible story.
A lot of people do, yes.
Is there a wonderful story?
Well, I think really where my social media management or engagement really kind of caught a zeitgeist for me was when I first joined the Obama campaign. I was 19 years old. I'd already worked on Senator Obama's senatorial campaign as a volunteer, and I quit college to join full-time in the office in Chicago at Campaign HQ. And one of the most powerful moments that we had, I had created Barack Obama's Facebook page. He was so proud when he got to see his little face, and he said, "Oh, that's me on the page." And the first big event that we did was during the first big presidential debate, and we had built this algorithmic platform that every time there was a comment or an incoming question, it would sort it by topic or category. And we had the entire new media team in the office, everyone taking a different category or policy. And we were live answering people's questions and live responding to all of the comments. And that was the first time that had ever been done. Again, this was still the first time social media had ever been used in politics. We ended up getting millions of people to engage with us and being able to answer tens of thousands of questions live. It was incredible, and to be able to see that amount of growing engagement and for us to be able to actually live answer people's questions when normally ever before you had only been able to interact with a television, yelling at it or being excited at it, whatever you wanted to feel, but there was nothing coming back at you, that I really thought that Facebook and social media in general is going to be one of the most powerful tools for positive political change. Found out a little differently a few years later, but that's a story for another time.
It's a great story. Josh?
So I think social media has impacted my life positively in a lot of ways, and a few things quickly came to mind, but then one particular stuck out. In 2014, over Thanksgiving, my father, who was receiving treatment for cancer at that time, his medication went off balance. And I remember I was with my wife's family, and I received a text from my dad, and he was not well. He was a little out of sorts, and he said, I'm scared, I'm leaving home. And that was the last, I got a disturbing photo, and he was gone. And about an hour later, I received a phone call from my stepmom. "Your dad has left, we don't know where he is." And we found video footage of him from the gas station, of him throwing his phone out the window. Because I worked in location-based social media, he knew Josh will, find me. And he ditched his phone. We didn't know where Dad was. And I ended up hitting Twitter, and I said, "Hey, my dad, this is, Dallas." I said, "My dad's left home. All we know is he's in a truck. He's wearing a bathrobe, and he's driving north on whatever." And of course, it picked up steam, and the folks at Twitter found it, and they dumped a bunch of ad credit onto my account and said, "Hey, boost this tweet, boost it out." And it steamrolled. Next thing you know, again, it's like been viewed, hundreds of thousands of times. And the next day we received, there was a tweet. It's like, I see a guy, matches this description, has the backpack outside of a Walmart in Branson, Missouri. And this checked a few boxes off, and because of the help of Twitter, we were able to locate my dad. And it was just this unbelievable, again, the support of a community to come together and actually find a missing person in this case, just floored me, and I'll always be thankful for that.
So when you moderate a panel like this, none of this was prepared in advance, and then you hope that people tell stories like that, because and by the way, I assume some of you have amazing, wonderful social media, change your life, meet your partner, people, it is a magical thing. And the reason I wanted to start there is because there's going to be plenty of stuff that we think needs to get fixed. Features that are missing, things that are broken, and we'll talk about those too. By the way, I should tell you, it's bright up here, so I'm going to have a little trouble seeing the mic. Where is the, okay, there it is. Okay, good. Thank you. So feel free to jump up as quickly. Here would be the home run of this hour. If somebody says something, I have an idea, or I'm building a company, or I've got a startup, or I feel like, and somebody else says, hey, that aligns with something I know how to do, and we make little marriages in this room and we get some things done, that would be great. And and the reason I'm continuing to say these things is because at most of these kinds of things, the people that come up and pitch their business at the last 5 minutes of time, but here we want you to do that. So as quickly as you want to join the conversation, the mic is there and we'll call on you. Now I want to get to the second half of my question. Tell me something spectacularly terrible. And I will go first. It's a little one. And some of you will think this is wildly naive. But I was involved in some argument on Twitter, this was 2 or 3 years ago, and somebody said something about me that was kind of mean, not so wildly mean that it injured me, and they put my name in brackets. And some of you know what that means, and some of you don't, but I didn't. They put my name in 3 brackets, and that means Jewish. I found out later. And it was as seething and like I didn't know that I was being labeled, and it was clearly meant to be anti-Semitic, and I'd never been called out in that way on stage or in a tweet, and to this day it makes me tremble when I think of it. So doesn't have to be as bad as that.
Well, as a non-white woman on the internet, every day is fun. Every day is a new adventure. I would say, all of the positives can also be amplified in the opposite direction, back at you, especially if you make certain contingents of the internet mad. I would say probably my worst one was getting... it was a holiday, and a lot of capital T tech men were extremely mad at me. And I just spent it on the couch trying to figure out why it was happening all at once. The same kind of deluge, like when your phone you just wish you could throw it in the ocean. And I got a call the next day, and they was a source who explained to me that, this billionaire venture capitalist, he just has his firm, go after people. And so that was all orchestrated against you, and that's why it felt like, and I don't know if that's true, but it made me feel better because it was horrible.
Well, some of you might know part of this story, but about a month after Donald Trump got elected president, there were 2 different groups of people in Cambridge Analytica that had either worked for the Trump campaign or for the Trump Super PAC, also known as Make America #1 or Defeat Crooked Hillary. And when the Super PAC came up to give their presentation to the rest of us that hadn't worked on these campaigns, they showed the moment where they decided that instead of this being a pro-Trump Super PAC, that it would just be an anti-Hillary Super PAC. And that was when they started doing testing of negative and inflammatory content. content that was specifically designed to make people angry, stuff that was designed specifically to be targeted at people who were neurotic, fear-based messaging, that it was at least 30 to 40% more effective than anything else that they were sending out. Higher engagement, more sharing, more signing up, more donations. And so they went 100% negative and started showing us the content that they pivoted to because of the data that this was showing and how incredibly effective negative messaging is on social media. I recorded it and later used it in whistleblowing evidence.
In early April of 2020, so this is shortly after the pandemic began, I was working a puzzle at home on about 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, and my phone buzzed a couple times, and I ignored it. And then my daughter's phone, buzzed. She was early in her teens, I think 14 at the time, and she ran out the front door. And of course, you wonder what's your teenage daughter running out the front door, for. And I called after her, and she didn't come back. And so, continued. And 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. Only this time it was from her. So I picked up, and she said, "Dad, you need to come outside. The police are here." And really? And she's like, "Come right now." And I walked and opened the front door and was greeted by floodlights and police officers with long rifles drawn and laser sights on me. Immediately I was taken aback and said, "Have I been swatted?" And there were 40 officers, 5 dogs. They had surrounded our house, and they escorted me off the front porch where I was given the pat down. I had to call my family that was still inside and have them come out of the home while they cleared our home. And turns out I had been the victim of a swatting incident. As an early adopter, I have a 2-letter username on a lot of platforms, including my initials, JW, on Twitter and Instagram. And as it turns, there's a dark web of people that target short, common usernames with the goal to flip it for cryptocurrency before they can be, caught. And as it turns out, I was one of those targets as well. And also as an early internet user, all the other people with those common usernames. And it turns out that there's a lot of us who have received very, very similar incidents. And it's horrifying. And I think that's the realization that this isn't, it's not all fun and games anymore.
So thank you. By the way, again, this was an experiment, and I'm going to deem it a success because those two ends, first of all, the stories are far more horrible than I expected them to be, and they're also far more, putting your father's story and the swatting story on opposite ends of the spectrum, that's what we're here to talk about today. And one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure we started with the positives is because they don't get amplified. Right? That story about your father, maybe you told a reporter 5 years ago, maybe it got written about once, but it doesn't have the same resonance. This is, and so I was on a panel 2 days ago talking about how social media and media broadly amplifies hate for profit. And one of the things I would put to the audience and put to you guys to talk about is it just a simple problem of basically misaligned incentives, where it is far more profitable to amplify horrible information than it is to amplify positive information?
I think you, absolutely. I think, go for
I'm
it.
really happy to jump in here, and it's an unfortunate answer that no one's really going to like, and the problem is actually with human psychology, that we are much more likely to click on and engage with inflammatory content, something that provokes a negative emotion in us, something that makes us want to get up and go take an action, share that information with someone because you are angry, you are incited. On the other hand, surprise or awe can sometimes really meet up with that emotion, but it's a little bit rare, and it's hard to predict what is going to inspire that kind of feeling in someone. But anger and incitement, unfortunately, is something that we are always going to engage with more. So on the incentive and infrastructure side on social media, and especially on ROI for advertisers, we really need to bake in a lot of checks and balances around that, because unfortunately it gets more clicks, therefore it makes a higher ROI, therefore information spreads much more quickly when it is negative, and that is a problem that is not just a social media problem, it is a human problem.
I'm being quiet on purpose. I've plenty to say about that, but
Yesterday, in the midst of, we launched a product here, and there was obviously bad news from, banks over the weekend, and I received, a text from my wife yesterday morning, and the text was, "I'm so angry." That was the first one. And then the next one rolled in, I'm livid about this. This is disgusting to me. And of course, I'm waiting for it. And then the link came through. And I won't amplify what it was, but it was an article, and it was political, and it was just garbage. It's the sort of thing that makes you angry, and you want to tell somebody about it. And of course, whether it's Twitter or whether it's your news app, you click on these things, and it knows that you clicked on that. And we joke about a lot. Like, if you're a parent, you tend to click on sad stories that involve children. And then it's like, oh, you like reading sad stories about children. I got more sad stories about children, for you. And so let's feed you some more. Next thing you know, you're like your entire feed is just sad stories about children. It's horrible, And it's like, well, don't click on that. But then again, the computer is like, well, you clicked on it, go. And that is one of those things of like, how do you get out of that cycle?
Well, isn't that tied, though, to an advertising-based infrastructure, like pay structure, which you're experimenting with, right, with Gowalla now? Like, people, I think, are realizing the cost of having it subsidized by advertising because, it's in the company's interest to keep you engaged with the platform if they get their revenue from advertising. And I think I of course agree with what you're saying, that psychological instinct, but we have as humans, many other instincts that could also be, incentivized. There's other methods, other buttons to push. I feel like after 15 years of intermittent variable rewards, I mean, part of the reason you want to share that is maybe, in the past, you've gone viral for something like that, or you get those likes and those retweets and shares and what have you. And I really think that if the financial incentive is different, we haven't even begun really to structure something that is based on amplifying our less base human instincts.
So I think one of the best.
1 second, because she teed up the Gowalla 2.0 pitch. So tell us what you're doing.
That's right. I mean,
we're right there.
I think one of the big differences between if we look at the early days, the exuberant, man is inherently good, let's share our naive, I'm eating a sandwich, tweets. Part of that was like, you knew when Twitter launched, you kind of knew the people who were reading your content, quote unquote, and they were people that were largely at this conference or whatnot. And there was a comfort level of I'm sharing a certain thing with this audience, and they won't judge me for that, or I won't get this negative blowback. And then because Natasha, to your point, there's this, we want to serve more ads, so the larger audience, more clicks, more whatever benefits that machine, and we've seen how it kind of has dissembled in front of our eyes now. And so I think this idea of how do you share with smaller groups of people again, or how do you share that sort of content of like, hey, again, yesterday morning I checked in and I was at Houndstooth Coffee, and that went out to a small group of my friends who can see that. And 30 minutes later, a friend I haven't seen in 9 years walked in. It was like, oh, I saw your check-in, here you are. And, that's the sort of thing, like how do you get back to that, again, that loop of simple, choice content.
Let's assume not everyone in the audience knows Gowalla, either one or two. Just give us the elevator pitch so we know the product.
So the elevator pitch is, it's a social network for you and your close friends that keeps you connected. And so I can right now open up and I can say, hey, I'm at the Austin Convention Center, and it shares that with friends that I've, it's like Find My Friends with the Messenger. And we've gamified it a little bit. We make it fun. We amplify the places because I love this idea that you can discover, more of the world through the eyes of your friends. So it's not just, here's a face on a map, but more, let me associate you with, again, the coffee that you like, or the movie that you went to, or the concert you saw, New Order last night. And I think those are the sorts of stories that, to your point, of how do you amplify that? Of like, oh, I love that band, or I've been to that place. And if you can get a loop or a feedback around that, that's different than, hey, I read this sad news story. There's something interesting there.
I completely agree with that, and I just wanted to jump in with just one example, which I think is amazing, and I'm actually really excited to try GoWalla. I remember in the beginning of Facebook when you could share where you were at with friends. I never really share where I'm at with an entire audience anymore until after I've already left. And I think a lot of people feel that way, and so that's a huge opportunity. But Upworthy was completely founded on the idea that, hey, yes, we have this human nature to engage with fear-based and negative messaging, but the social media and media companies don't need to take advantage of it. Actually, we could decide to only produce positive stories and see how that goes. And obviously that went really, really well for them. And they don't produce anything negative. It's 100% positive. I don't know how many people actually read Upworthy, but it's definitely a daily dose of happiness and excitement. For those of you that haven't tried it, I highly recommend. And I think it's about making sure that we have those experiments and we find out those data-driven ways to get people to engage with things that are not necessarily going to be that depressing, fear-based content that drives, unfortunately, a lot of investment in advertisement.
So for the last year, I've been running an organization in New York called the Center for Sustainable Media, focused entirely on young people and how they feel about the way they're treated in media. And I have to tell you, it's the most delightful conversation. Spent a lot of time with 15, 16-year-olds. They're so smart. They so understand. They love media. They love making it. They love sharing it. They love being part of it. And they are absolutely terrified by it. And when you talk to them, they say with absolute clarity, and they say time and time again, I hear this 10 times a week, I just want agency in my media life. And they don't understand why they are the product. And so what's interesting to me is all of us in different ways have told stories about great things that have happened when we share things, and things terrible that have happened when people were given permission to attack us essentially without any retribution. And a lot of the word you're hearing now, and you're hearing some of it in legislation, which we can talk about a little bit, but there is a lot of discussion about transparency. And I'll just give you my example of transparency. In New York, the health department puts letters on all the restaurant windows, A, B, C, and D. A, healthy, good. B, maybe some ice in the kitchen. I don't know anyone who would ever go in and sit down at a restaurant with a C on the window, ever. Because why? There's a restaurant right next door with an A. That transparency, however you feel about health inspectors, and I'm sure there are restaurant owners in the audience that will tell me otherwise, the fact that we don't know how the social networks behave when they know, and they know the data, and if we knew, hey, we're amplifying hate for profit, and here's evidence of that, we've shared it because we have to, I would say to advertisers, hey, please don't spend money trying to reach me on platforms that amplify hate. It's really simple. I will demerit your brand, XYZ brand, if you put money into places that amplify hate. It seems like we can close that loop.
I mean, there's quite a few ways to close that loop, but I really feel like one of the things that we constantly get away from, which is now a main part of a lot of regulatory conversations that I have with legislators, is that the reason why we have a no man's land in terms of accountability and legislation and transparency on social media is because we do not have currently the ability to enforce the laws that we expect in public to be upheld. We can't enforce those laws on social media. So for something that you can scream on social media to millions of people. If you were to say that in a town square on a public street, you would be arrested. But somehow you can say it on social media, even if you isn't even a you, you're a bot in a bot network that then gets amplified to billions of people even. And one of the main reasons for this lack of accountability is because we don't have to check our identity in order to use a social media account. Now, I'm not suggesting that people need to be their first name, last name with your picture on social media. You can be an avatar with a fake name. That's totally fine. But as we move into Web3 and you can actually have a digital identity where you have been identity checked and you can log in with that into social media, it means someone does know who you are. So when you decide to engage in incitement of hatred or violence or suppressing someone's vote, slander or libel, you can't just be a new fake account that was created by a bot network that is allowed to do that. No, it has to be a human being, and that human being can be held accountable for breaking the laws, just like we do in our daily lives. So we need to be able to expect that our civil rights, that our human rights, can be respected when we are leading our digital lives. And that is really the biggest gap that we have right now. We do have many ways to close it. Still think we're many years off because it's so hard to get federal legislation through Congress right now. But there are so many people working on it, and I think in the next couple of years we will start to see hopefully more of a civil society as opposed to a complete Wild West on our social media landscape.
Question for the audience. Anyone raise your hand if you're experimenting with any of the new Twitter alternative platforms? Anyone? Somebody here? It's hard to see. Does anyone want to just jump up and tell a story about how it's going? Do you want to just tell us about it? No. I've never been in a place with there you go. Okay, great.
I joined Mastodon, and it was incredibly confusing and difficult at the beginning when you had to find like the correct server and get invited to it. And I didn't, not only did I not, and trying to find like, oh, here are the topics I'm interested in. Oh, there are no servers for that. And I know they've opened it up more since then, but it was difficult at the beginning. But the thing I really appreciated was they, from the beginning at least, seemed to have put a lot of thought into sort of anti-harassment steps to make sure that it is a safer, more thoughtful place than the hellscape that Twitter is and has become more so.
So are you still on it? Did you stay on it?
I am, but I don't use it nearly as often as I use Twitter. There just isn't, I don't have the audience that I had there.
Understood. Anyone else? Anyone?
I'll say that I've been using a lot of Discord recently, so I know it's not exactly Twitter, but it's a chat platform, and I find that pretty confusing, especially when there's multiple conversations going on around an event or something like that, and you've got to keep going between different threads or servers or whatever the hell they're called. See, I don't even know the terminology, and I get trapped in these cycles.
Is there a reason why you find Twitter less confusing, like historically?
I think really it comes back to the fact that when Twitter first came out, I thought, oh yeah, they've just taken the status box from Facebook. And it grew little by little, and I grew with it. But one of the things I'd just like to ask you guys about here is I've got a 12-year-old. I don't let her on social yet, unfortunately for her. But, or fortunately, I'm not really sure, but what I am trying to do is build something that is good enough for her and her friends to be on. And I think that's one of the problems with virtuous, like tech for good, is often it's not as sexy as, you know, the adult version, which is what the kids want. Where do you stand on the fact that tech for good is usually the lame-ass version of good tech, bad tech?
By the way, it's a great question, and here's the only thing I will say that to be supportive. If you put a room together of 50 parents of kids your age and asked how many of them are struggling with it, you would get a 100% answer. I mean, many of the parents of the 15-year-olds I talk to they literally, what they'll say is, I go to bed at night terrified and I wake up in the morning terrified. So that's you're not alone in that. Yeah. And that will last for another year or two, and then at some point it won't. Advice for parents struggling with tech?
Boy, that's a difficult one. We've had to go through that, with a couple teenage daughters now. And my advice is pump the brakes as long as you can, and it becomes hard because you're swimming a little bit upstream because all their friends, have Snapchat or TikTok. I think TikTok's kind of a disaster. And I don't mean that from we can talk about the foreign government thing, but just this I'm gonna scroll forever, I think, doesn't necessarily foster the creativity or whatever you want as a parent. So fortunately, I do think that I believe there's a lot of kids out there that are starting to be more aware of this. I think there are role models that are spreading this word that, hey, maybe all social media isn't the best, certainly at that age, but I think it's a really difficult struggle, and I think it's something to be aware of.
And I'd like to say I would address that from two different angles. And one is that I would like to have hope that in the future you won't have to be as afraid and have so few options. I think there's a legal answer to this and an education answer to this. And one is that we don't have digital literacy education in most schools, but we're starting to. Many governments now have signed on at the national level to include digital literacy education in the public school curriculum. That has been led by the DQ Institute, and that is now a global effort. I spoke with them at the G20 about this, and there's many governments that are starting to sign on. It's being piloted in a lot of US schools as well. So hopefully that's generational change, and so kids will be a little bit more aware that if they are in the adult version, that they actually know how to be more conscious consumers of digital content and how to protect themselves. But secondly, there are a lot of large-scale lawsuits that are going on right now against companies like Meta, where hopefully as soon as possible over the next couple of years, we won't have our children targeted by suicide websites, et cetera, and so forth. Right now, I think there are poor excuses that they don't decide to spend any of their hundreds of billions of dollars investing in capacity building to prevent things like this is really just an excuse, but it's now criminal negligence, likely. So we'll see very soon what the courts decide.
Well, I think your question was about why is it lame-ass technology is the virtuous technology, right? I think that's a really excellent point. I also started Mastodon and was extremely frustrated by how wonky it was, and you're like, dear God, why can't just one engineer spend 2 hours so that I can log on to an app? And I think that though, there's a lot of momentum for change now. I mean, if you look at the number of former Twitter employees who are in Tech Reporter's inbox wanting to launch a new solution, I mean, open source projects get the goodwill and energy and time of so many people, and I think I couldn't picture a scalable way of doing it, but in terms of excitement around building something better, I think the more toxic and honestly the more lame that the mainstream versions get. I mean, just look at Instagram now. It's just like TikTok 2 weeks later, and it's not fun. So I think that incentivizes people to build new things. The problem has always been, you were saying you don't have the same audience. It's just really hard to compete with the scale and the social graph that these massive companies own. But I feel like there's more incentive than ever for even just a smaller network, if you can convince your friends. I mean, when you're an early adopter, you're always waiting for your friends to join the app, and that's what makes it good. But I see, for example, people moving to Signal more and more, which is a messaging app, not the same as social media, but I think people are looking for better ways of being online.
Now we've got some questions lined up. Go ahead. Or a statement.
Yeah, it's not a question.
Good.
I have a unique perspective. I'm actually the founder of a social networking app called Communia. I'm not from the tech industry. I'm a survivor. That's why I created my own app. I learned the hard way that you don't always have the freedom of speech that you would hope for on mainstream social media platforms. And one thing we do differently is that we require everyone to verify their identity before they can communicate with anyone on the app. And we're super bootstrapped, we're super small, but we have a lot of users, and we've had a lot of success with that. We've also recently monetized through unique added value features. That's also going well. So I just wanted to say that, you know, you can be more creative in how you make money. And we've had serious traction. So there is hope. And there are a lot of other up and coming social media startups, like Landing Space in particular, I'd shout out, that are doing things differently. So yeah, thanks.
Spell the name.
COMMUNIA.
Dot.
Just Communia. It's on the App Store, Apple and Android.
Very cool.
Thank you. Our Communia at socials. Thanks. Bye.
Excellent.
Just a tail on that, and to affirm, I think one of the exciting things we have seen now is because the totality of the users of social media and smartphones now is so much larger, niches have become larger too. And if you remember 10 years ago, getting somebody to spend 99 cents for an app was really, really difficult. And now people are much more inclined to, I will spend $6.99 or $7.99 for a streaming service or for something that brings me value. And so I do think there is hope for alternative business models where people in smaller communities are willing to spend, you know, X, Y a month in order to support something that they believe in. And so to that point, I think that there is encouraging signs to see different business models emerge here.
Go ahead.
Hey, so each of your intro, the bad side of social media, like really resonated with me. I have the word gold in my last name, so the three brackets, the echoes really resonate. My wife is a journalist at a major paper, so I know what you're going through. I found a Russian intelligence operation that was imitating my former employer back in 2017, so I know exactly the kind of content that real organizations had to compete with, which just didn't stand up. And last month I was swatted. So I'm a veteran. I am the founder of Task Force Butler Institute, and we are an organization that trains veterans in OSINT, open source intelligence, to hunt Nazis online. So, thank you. So, which is why I got swatted. I mean, yeah, I get it. So, so one of the things that's been most frustrating to me, and I used to be, I wrote the book on, like literally, on foreign entities that target troops, veterans, and our families with everything from propaganda to romance scams to extremist narratives. Facebook went and took that 200-page report that cost a nonprofit $250,000 to develop, said thank you, and made all of the evidence disappear. Now today, as I'm hunting neo-Nazis, I'm strictly focused on domestic threats. When someone reports an account that maybe I've been monitoring and trying to figure out who's behind it, the evidence just disappears. So what can be done to make sure that these companies are preserving evidence? Is this like a legislative thing, or do we even want them to preserve? Like, question for you, do we want them to preserve that evidence? Because when I find something where, you know, maybe I'm right around the corner from identifying a real world dangerous neo-Nazi, to have the trail go cold just sucks.
That's the entire point of a lot of the Web3 and distributed ledger blockchain-based startups in the social media space, which is that you can't delete data that has been created. You can hide it, or make it unsearchable, but say law enforcement went to the social media company, they would have that data. It would be encrypted on the blockchain. There wouldn't be a way to say that it didn't exist. So I think any forensic analysis of a blockchain-based database is made specifically for these purposes, so that when criminal activity is conducted through social media, that the evidence can never be deleted. And so I think that that is a huge step forward for social media and for making a more civil space in our digital lives. We're not there yet. A lot of social media are still based on Web 2 technology. And just like a lot of the biggest social media companies out there, they often delete data, and that's a huge problem and has made a lot of government investigations very difficult.
Have you been able to get any communication with Facebook at all?
Yeah, and it's a one-way street. I mean, same thing as like talking to the FBI. I'll give them, you know, troves of evidence, and accounts disappear, and that's all I get out of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've gotten, and not Facebook in particular, but the companies have changed policies in a way that's made it so much more frustrating for researchers, even though researchers have given them like a protocol that would work to remove the content and yet keep the evidence. So I guess what I've seen is just people figuring out how to store that themselves, which, you know, depending on what type of content you're storing, it, you know, puts you in some legal liable issues, right? But you're not alone. Like I do hear this from researchers all the time, and I think the companies know that, and they just are choosing to go a route that's easier for them.
So there's also legislation. So the only thing that there's bipartisan support for in Washington right now, the only thing that I can find is both the Democrats and the Republicans seem to agree that there needs to be some big tech controls put in place. Now, they agree for totally different, they don't agree with each other. I mean, and that's the danger of it, is that both sides are writing bills that look the same, and they're both about protecting children theoretically, but if you dig below the surface, you know, they have different political agendas. That being said, I think you're gonna see some legislation move through, just because there's a lot of incentive for it. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, there's lots of debate about. Next, go ahead. This is great, by the way, thank you.
Hi, I wanted to add into some of the discussion about social media platforms, especially when it comes to Gen Z. I think a lot of the times Gen Z is often villainized as, oh, we need to teach Gen Z how to kind of navigate social media. I got Instagram in middle school, so I think a lot of the times we're kind of centering a lot of these conversations around people who are digital natives, whereas I have the hardest time telling my grandparents that the crap they're reading on Facebook isn't true, and even my parents' generation. And so I am very curious into resources and thoughts perhaps on how to educate older generations. My parents and my grandparents are going to live and die on Facebook, whereas me and my friends are still shifting platforms, and we're not really on Instagram anymore as much. We're on TikTok. Right now our highest social media platforms are platforms like Be Real, which are kind of more similar to platforms that you're doing.
Big fan.
Yeah, do like more smaller groups. But what I'm seeing is my parents' generations Facebook all day, every day. So kind of how are we going to teach older generations, kind of teach an old dog new tricks of being able to look at something and know that that isn't real? Because they're struggling with that.
And by the way, we're 10 seconds away from the evolution of AI making that way more complicated. I mean, every day. Yeah.
So true, and I think, again, this goes back to a digital literacy discussion, which one of the main components of digital literacy is media literacy, and that's understanding how to be a conscious consumer of digital content, how to spot when you are being targeted, how to spot disinformation, misinformation, and the deep fakes, all of the different types of content that now we're seeing every single day on our news feed. And the less digital native you are, the less obvious it is to you when you're seeing something that has that specific intent behind it. So if you go to my charity's website, ownyourdata.foundation, we have a lot of different links to media literacy resources. And I would say my favorite is on dqinstitute.org. So DQ Institute is one of our partners. They created not an IQ or an EQ indicator set, but DQ, a digital intelligence quotient. And media literacy is a huge chunk of their indicator points. And they have a lot of different resources around that are now being taught all around the world, and they are kind of the G20 global experts on digital literacy, and the IEEE, which is the world's largest technology organization and standard setting organization. It's the IEEE global standard in digital literacy education and what is actually being implemented into national curriculum.
Next.
Hi, I am very nervous, but feel called to share. I live in San Francisco. I work in tech. I was at South by last year, and I got COVID. it really affected my attention span, my energy, etc. I had long COVID, and all I could really accomplish was laying in bed and watching TikTok videos for hours on end. I didn't know how long I would quit going into it, but I did quit social media. It's now been a year. It changed my life. I didn't have an issue with the FOMO or the likes or any of that. It was more so just the attention span, I think, the ability to, I have a bad thought, let me go to social media and forget about it. I ended up reading Digital Minimalism and found out that I had kind of created my own digital manifesto, which is I no longer use apps that take advantage of my brain chemistry. It changed the way I look at the world. It changed the way I look at my body. I'm never gonna go back. I was able to go off all of my anxiety and depression medication. And yeah, this is myself. I take 2, so called to share that with you all. Thank you.
Congratulations and well done.
You're stronger than I am.
And if anyone wants to know how to weed out apps and features in apps that take advantage of your brain chemistry, I think my friend Tristan Harris's organization, the Center for Humane Technology, has the best resources for that. It's humanetech.org, and go to humanetech.org/what-to-do, and they have this incredible list. I also have a link on my website, ownyourdata.foundation, to their resources, and it will tell you how to take away all of the different pop-up notifications that are not from real humans. Like, you don't need to know, your friend's dog's birthday. You don't need a notification for that. And you can also, in many phones, actually turn off colors so that it's black and white. And again, it stops this brain chemistry trigger that addicts you to your phone. Again, like, Facebook has hired the same people that design slot machines in Vegas in order to make their products addictive. So we need to remember that and do what this lady so intelligently has done and realize that we can do things to interact with technology in a healthier way.
We have time for just one more question, and then I have a final question for the panel.
Thank you. Scott Henderson, I've been coming to South by since 2009. It was in 2008. I saw on Twitter everyone was in Austin eating barbecue, and I said, why am I not there? So I've been coming for 15 years and went from 35 to 50-year-old in that time period. And one of the things I've been pretty jaded with social media as of late, because it seems like you have to map a successful app to the 7 deadly sins. And what I'm hearing here is hopeful. One is niches are getting bigger, and so you can build without having to take the old ways. And so I guess the question for you as a panel is more noble ways that aren't, better ways, more informed ways that we can go about building social media apps that aren't going to be taken advantage by. Because it seems like we start with this idealism of utopia, and then human nature shows up again, right? So if we just know that we are wired this way, people are going to take advantage of these wires. Is it really in the niches that we can go? Because I now run a venture studio, and there's a company called shemate.club helping female athletes in high school connect to female athletes in college to get role models, because they don't get role models on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. What other noble paths could we go that are realistic noble paths?
What you guys don't know is we arranged this, he and I. That was exactly the question I was going to ask you to wrap up. So that's perfect. Thank you. Tell us one thing, either a URL or a site or a person, one thing that people can write down and take away that you think will help them have more control or more autonomy in their digital lives or share with their family. One thing. And by the way, you can pitch your own product. That's fine.
Let's see. I'll pitch something. I know there are a number of apps out there. One was an app called Freedom. There are probably other ones that have come around since then that basically allow you to, or even focus mode on your phone. I found it's like, how do you just say, hey, I want these apps to shut off, and there are apps that will help you do it, or you can manually set it up yourself. But I do think, if you are looking to just again kind of break that cycle of, hey, how do I open Twitter every time I have a spare moment. Putting yourself into that focus mode is a great way to throttle it. And then again, I think looking for, again, if I am going to shill Koala or Be Real or some of these other networks that are focused and allow you to connect with groups of friends that you really know, and this kind of goes back to our discussion about identity. I think that's where I'm excited to see creativity is in products like that encourage you to connect with real people that you have real relationship with.
I'm downloading Koala when we get off the stage. Brittany.
I think you're exactly right. It's really screen time management in order to improve your mental and physical health with this addiction that we all have to technology. And whether you want to call it an addiction or a necessity, we all lead digital lives. So the more that we can free up our mental space for things that help us actually achieve our life goals, the better. So on the screen time management side, definitely go into every unnecessary app and turn off all notifications if possible, or at least all notifications where it's not a direct call or message from a human being that you care about. It's so incredibly important. And if for some reason you have still buzzing or noise that actually comes out of social media notifications, turn that off. I've had my phone on silent for almost 13 years, and I'm telling you, my mental health has vastly improved from back then. So the more that you can take away things that are unnecessary, if it's not your best friends or your family or your work colleagues, you should not be hearing or seeing notifications from these things. You can decide to set aside, an hour or so a day where you're gonna go and you're gonna check your private messages. You're gonna go and you're gonna look at your news feed, but don't make that a constant thing. Set aside time specifically for that, and then so much more time opens up. You can't believe what you can accomplish when you really decide to minimize your social media engagement.
Natasha?
Well, I'm certainly not going to sit up here and talk about how to have a healthy relationship with social media because I don't have one. But it has really been beneficial to me to understand what they call dark patterns. The ways that these apps gamify and incentivize you to stay engaged, to stay on them. Like just to repeat, the earlier point where Brittany was talking about like certain human urges, they talk about like the way that these apps go for like the basest, like your lizard brain level human. We have more sophisticated wants and desires than just sharing bad information. And it's very much tied to the financial structure and how these companies make money. And I think when you know that, has that kept me off Twitter? No. But but do I know what is happening to me, and does it stop me in certain instances? Has it made me disengage because I know what's going to happen when I tweet something, and I don't want to take the next 3 hours of my life kind of, intermittently checking my phone. I think you should always know what's being used and deployed, what like strategies are being deployed on you, and there's lots of good information about these dark patterns.
So I'll end with two things. When you talk to teenagers, because they're going to be the solution, the thing that we've come up with and that I'm proud of is that we believe that young people deserve digital dignity. And if you go to sustainablemedia.center, we have a newsletter we'd love to have you join. With that, my wife and I have talked about this. We've determined that Duke is too young. He doesn't have a social media account. He's not on Instagram. So I thought I would just end with Duke. This is the only time he's going to be on the internet, so snap your pictures now. Thank you, panel. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing.